Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S. Those 7 words appeared in a presidential daily brief more than a month before the September 11th attacks. 20 years later, we're learning new details about that famous memo. Former CIA officer David Priest recently spoke with intelligence leaders at the time, as well as the lead author of the memo. And Priest tweeted this: "She told me," that's the memo writer, "that she regrets not hitting the main point harder. She said, I've thought a lot about how the article reads. It would have been better to say all these threats we have seen all summer could be in the United States." And David Priest is joining us now to talk about this. He was the daily intelligence briefer to FBI Director Robert Mueller and Attorney General John Ashcroft during the George W. Bush administration. He's also the author of the President's Book of Secrets, The Untold Story of Intelligence Briefings to America's Presidents. As you point out, this is really the most famous one, David, and it's fascinating to hear this story really of regret. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that whole summer, I was in the Counterterrorist Center along with that author and a small group of others who were analyzing the threats to the United States from terrorist groups. And there was no doubt in anyone's mind that a major attack was coming. This was not a surprise. And there had been a series of pieces put in front of the president into the president's daily brief, which contains many other things as well. But we were certainly pushing the president on the idea that bin Laden is up to something. Al-Qaeda is planning something. There were upwards of 40 different pieces in the president's daily brief in the 9 months or so before September 11th talking about bin Laden. And what the author of this piece is referring to there is the fact that this specific piece on August 6th, the one that the 9/11 Commission published, and therefore it became famous, it speaks specifically to bin Laden's intent to attack in the United States. And it does it with a little bit of a historical feel. What has bin Laden said? What historical intelligence reporting do we have suggesting this? But she didn't actually say outright, Mr. President, everything we've been telling you all summer about this heightened threat, it all could be about the United States itself. Now, she's under no illusions that that would have necessarily made a difference. The president sees 5 or 6 different pieces every day in the president's daily brief, many of which have threats from around the world. But it's one of the many things that many of us who are working there look back and say, you know, could we have done one thing more to help prevent these attacks?
It is fascinating to know that there were so many of these memos. We know of this one, right? It is the most famous, but it's important to remember there were dozens leading up to it, and that President Bush did ask about it. It's not like, you know, it wasn't on his radar, bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Can you just take us through how this PDB memo was assembled?
Sure. Well, there had been a lot of attention to Al-Qaeda, as I mentioned. And memories differ as to the exact genesis of this one. The president and the national security advisor at the time, Condi Rice, have suggested that the president himself asked for it. Others remember that the briefer, Michael Morell, who later became the acting director of the CIA, that Michael actually thought this would fill a gap in the president's knowledge. Either way, the analyst gets the call saying, you have something to write tonight to get to the president tomorrow morning. And she pulls together from the CIA perspective, here are the threats related to the United States from bin Laden, and here's what we can say about why we should take that threat seriously. Now, the threat from a terrorist group or anything is really comprised of 2 parts. It's the threat and the opportunity. But the threat is broken down itself into the intent and the capability. You may really want to do something, but can you do it? This piece was mostly about the intent. It was about the desire to attack. But she felt it would be incomplete if she didn't answer a little bit about that capability to strike in the U.S. So she reached out to her counterparts at the FBI to see, can we put something in here about the actual Al-Qaeda presence in the U.S.? And back then, it was not an integrated intelligence community. The PDB was largely a CIA thing. So she got input from the FBI analyst, called the FBI analyst back on the phone to make sure it sounded okay. And that was it. It did not get vetted by senior FBI officials. Perhaps if it had been, there might have been more granularity about what was known even then about Al-Qaeda presence in the U.S.
And with that recommendation of more integration, with the 9/11 Commission, that's the hope that the process would bring today. I do want to read part of this memo. It says clandestine foreign government and media reports indicate bin Laden since 1997 has wanted to conduct terrorist attacks in the U.S. Bin Laden implied in U.S. television interviews in 1997 and 98 that his followers would follow the example of World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Youssef and bring the fighting to America. So, you point out this has a historic feel, but at least when you're talking in broad terms, that is speaking to the intent and the goal and the ultimate desire in the future of al-Qaeda.
You're exactly right. And thinking like a policymaker would, like the president reading this, the natural question that comes, if I read something in August of 2001 that cites an interview from 1997, my first question is, well, is it still an active threat? How do we know he still intends to do this? And this article does go on to explain al-Qaeda has a very long timeline for conducting attacks. The East Africa embassy bombings that happened in 1998, those had been planned for years, and al-Qaeda was not deterred by setbacks along the way. So it's a way of telling the president, bin Laden has said this. We also have some secret intelligence reporting supporting that he wants to attack in the U.S., and don't be fooled by the fact that it hasn't happened yet, because they have a long timeline, so the intent is almost certainly still there.
As a lot of people involved in the war in Afghanistan have reflected on, what was achieved here in the last 2 decades, one of the things that you'll hear people involved in the architecture of it will say to justify is they'll say, look, we haven't had another 9/11 style attack. We haven't seen that on U.S. soil. That makes it a success. I wonder what you think about that assessment, and also about moving forward here and the possibility of avoiding something like that in the near and even long term.
Yeah, there have no doubt been countless lives saved in the time since 9/11 due to enhanced counterterrorist efforts. And for anybody to say that the investment that we made as a country, that the men and women who served in Afghanistan, that it was a waste, they haven't talked to the members of the armed forces who have actually held that Afghan child and helped them get to school. And they would not have been able to do that with the Taliban in power for those 20 years. They also don't think about the attack in 2006, where multiple airliners were taken down with liquid explosives over the Atlantic Ocean, and perhaps 1,500 people died. They don't remember that because it didn't happen, because the lessons learned from 9/11 and the efforts in the counterterrorism realm helped prevent that and many, many other attacks. Certainly, there has been no other major attack in the United States. And I have to tell you, from being in the counterterrorist center before and after 9/11, I would not have predicted that. I would have predicted that with what we already knew about al-Qaeda, what we already knew about their worldwide presence and their determination to attack and attack again, it seemed a near certainty that they would be able to pull off a major attack in the U.S. because they only need to get lucky once in a while to pull off an attack. They can fail 100 times. They only need one to work to get those headlines. The fact that that didn't happen is a credit to the United States military efforts overseas, to the United States intelligence apparatus, to diplomats, to everyone who worked on the counterterrorist effort after 9/11. We should not lose sight of that just because the experience in Afghanistan ended so badly.
Yeah, maybe something to think of as we put our shampoo in little bottles when we travel. David, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.